So just a disclaimer, if you don't want to end up on camera on YouTube, stay outside of the line that goes off to that door. But I like to do a YouTube live stream of these because it's hard to take all this information in. It really can help to be able to go back and watch it again. And what I've found is there's always all folks that can't show up in whatever I'm doing this. So there's usually 2 or 3 times as many folks online as there are in the room. And then you can watch it later on and things like that. So if I'm not speaking loud enough, you can crank the volume on your computer later on. If the font's too small, you can blow it up on your computer later on. But to preface it, so these folks that are watching it later actually know what we're talking about, the title is Whidbey Changing? The answer to that is always duh. Yes, it's changing. It can't stay the same. And what I'm going to talk about is real estate and the affordability and the trends that I've seen in the real estate data that kind of tie into all this. I'll preface all this, though, because you probably know more than 2 realtors, and they probably have 2 completely different personalities. Here I am. I'm not going to claim that I know everything. That's why I scoffed when she said I was an expert. As a matter of fact, down here it says, I am a consultant, a writer, a speaker, a teacher, a photographer, an engineer, an entrepreneur, and a real estate broker. Of course, this is a Whidbey resume. Whidbey resume is rarely one job title. Just to kind of give you an idea of what I'd be doing today if I was back in my old career as an engineer, I was an aerodynamicist working stability and control on 737s. So when the black boxes came back, we were the ones that had the data. Which the first comment we always have is, did anybody get hurt? In a case like this, things get very serious very fast. But that also, not so much to show you, look what I used to do, but it does play into how I'm going to present this. I am really comfortable with big heaps of data that look like they may not make any sense. So when I became a realtor, I started to realize that there is a wealth of data out there. And a lot of the conversations about housing, affordability, and all that sort of thing, they're too complex to carry over in an hour. But at least I can go into the data and show you the trends that I see in the data. So it's not just anecdotal. Here's what's actually happened. Here's what's actually happening. The other thing I'll pass along, though, is I've also had more than an engineer's point of view in the world. I have to count myself. I think I'm 12 books now. After I retired from Boeing at 38, which was a nice thing to be able to do, some folks convinced me that I should write a book about it. After I'd already written 4 other books, I wrote a book on personal finance that came out as the market crashed. So the stock market crashed, the real estate market crashed, the job market crashed, and all of a sudden I'd lost almost everything I had. So there's going to be a sequel to that book, which is Middle Class to Millionaire to Muddling By. But along the line, evidently I was reasonably good at describing complicated things simply. So that's kind of the approach I like to take to this sort of thing. I have some understanding of the data and a bit of an artist background to myself. I have a series of 12-month photo essays of the island. As much as I live near the very southern tip of the island, like I say, I'm so far south that I'm closer to Edmonds than I am to Langley. I like the island. And this talk is going to be about Whidbey Island with some focus on individual areas. But in general, when I say Whidbey, I try to say the entire thing from Deception Pass to Cultus Bay. So with that all making sense so far? Okay, cool. If it ain't making sense, tell me, because, she gave me this. I've never used one of these pointers before. This is just so cool. I'd like to start with the caveats, because when you start talking about data, it's really easy to have 2, 3, 4, 8 different ways of expressing something. For instance, today when I was driving around, I heard that housing was up. Housing was up like 6% or something like that. And 2 sentences later, they were talking about housing was down. what they were talking about was the number of houses being built was up and the price of those houses were down. It's really easy to hear a news article, see a headline that says something like that. So I try to be clear about whether or not we're talking about the number of houses that are built, available for sale. And when we talk about prices, there's the price that they asked for it and there's the price they got. So right now, the median sales price on Whidbey is about $400,000. Okay, the median sales price is $400,000. The median sale price in South Whidbey right now is $630,000. What that says is there's a lot of expensive houses that haven't sold. But we also don't know if that median sales price is going to go up, and that's probably where you're going to get to here. Median, by the way, is not the average. If anybody wants to talk about the math side, I'll be happy to. And then the other thing is to understand what span it's happening over. There's been a lot of talk about what's happening in Seattle, that Seattle is imploding. And we'll get into, well, yes, if you look a month-to-month kind of thing, there were some downturns. But if you look at a year-to-year, it definitely is not imploding. And then where is it you're really talking about? If there's any statisticians, feel free to chime in. I start off with this one. This is my house, by the way. If anybody is familiar with Zillow, who isn't familiar with Zillow? Okay, cool. So Zillow will give you an estimate. Okay. So, you can go online and you can get a value estimate for your house. Zillow is the most commonly used one. Redfin's another common one. There are dozens, I'm sure. And then, so blue one is Zillow. The red one is Redfin. And those are the ones you type in your address and it's a good chance it'll give you an estimate. And then the other ones, the green one and the gray one, are industry ones. They're ones that the realtors get to see that are put together by, well, supposedly the corporations. When you get down to it, each one of these is being put together by teams of mathematicians. And if this all made sense, and if this was all easy, then every single one of those lines would be on top of each other. But if you look at, let's see, there we go. You look back around Christmas time, and Zillow said my house was down like $295, and the rest of the market, the rest of two of the other ones were saying it was like $370. So there's $70,000 difference between estimates for the exact same house. Now my house is, matter of fact, I do full disclosure. I really don't care. I live alone, so who's going to drop in on me. Anyway, I live down in Sandy Hook. It's an 868 square foot house, 2-bedroom, 1 bath. I bought it in 2007 after it had come down 20%, at which point it went down another 30% or 40%. It's back above it now. But these estimates are worse, or put it this way, they're much better in places where there are a lot of houses, the houses sell quickly, and the houses are very similar. So if you go into a development in Bayview, or you go into a condominium complex in Seattle, you've got an awful lot of houses that are very much alike. You come to Whidbey, finding two houses beside each other that are alike, you got to go work at it. There's a series of classes realtors have to take, and I went to one of them over on the east side, and they said, how do you make your house stand out from the market? It's like, this is not an issue. This is the one with the tree trunk in the living room as a support post. This is the one with a wine barrel for a sauna, But it also means that all those estimates you see online have much more difficulty in rural environments, small towns, and places where houses don't sell as quickly, as often, because they don't have as much data to deal with. So having said that, that's kind of disclaimer, but it's also, if you're keying an awful lot of what you see with Zillow, look at it for a while before you make a decision. So here's the core of the whole thing. This is the median sales price for a house on Whidbey Island, not just South Whidbey. So that number is right around $330,000. A lot of those news reports that were talking about Seattle dropping at the end of last year, let's see, were happening right as we were peaking. And the question is whether or not we were going to drop. This is why I gave this back in fall of last year, and folks have been asking for updates. For the last few months, we've actually been going up. There's little bits and pieces and little bips and burps. But in general, for the last few months, we've still been up. And think about that. That was in this winter that had those windstorms and the snowstorms and the outages and all this sort of thing. The other way to also look at this is that since the middle of 2012, we've gone from 220,000 to 330,000. That's 50% increase in the last 7 years. That's fairly significant. And it means we're back above where we had been with the recession. I will break it out into the various areas because, like we were saying, Langley is not going to say it's anything like Coupeville, and Coupeville is not going to say it's anything like Oak Harbor. And there's a bug in front of the ones, evidently. So South Whidbey, this is the number of houses for sale. South Whidbey and North Whidbey, they bounce around with each other. Generally, South Whidbey has more houses for sale than North Whidbey. And then Central Whidbey doesn't have as many. What that starts to get into is, well, Central Whidbey has a lot more farms. And Oak Harbor has a lot of turnover. And it's our city. Come on. The other thing to notice, though, is that if it seems like there's not as much going on as there used to be, it's not. We used to have about 570 houses in any given month, 570 houses for sale. Take a look at all the ones that come on the market, off the market. Now we're down to less than half of that. We're at about 40%. So in the last 10 years, there are a lot fewer houses for sale on the island than there were a decade ago. And that's true for each one of the areas. This is bouncier, but this is what's happening underneath that data. Because, the summertime hits, the tourists come in. The winter hits, the tourists leave. So this is how busy the market really is seasonally. And because of those bumps, look out here to what we just had this winter, and except for South Whidbey, Coupeville, Central Whidbey and North Whidbey hit record lows, and we almost hit a record low number of houses in inventory. To typify that for South Whidbey, which is basically Green Bank South, there were at times this winter fewer than 80 houses for sale, and there were 124 brokers. It was a very good time to take a vacation if you could afford to do it. But that also means the brokers are kind of noticing there aren't as many houses for sale anymore. But get into the economics of it, though, and supply and demand. So we're just talking about the fact that supply is down. Demand isn't necessarily down. If anything, especially in Oak Harbor, demand is up. So let's break it up by price range. Again, this is for the entire island. So, there's those drops I was talking about. But now I've broken them out into, are they expensive houses or cheap houses? Well, are they affordable houses or high-quality houses? And the biggest drop in all those is, these are $300,000 houses and below. These are 300 to 600. That's 600 to $1 million, and that's $1 million. So we have lost in terms of having inventory for affordability, because I'm going to assume that the affordable homes are going to be the cheaper ones. We've lost over 50% of the inventory. It's only about 40% as many houses to pick from as there were before. Now, that's actually kind of the same sort of trend in the other ones, but the total number of houses that are no longer available to buy is in the cheap range. The other consequence of this is that if you divide the $1 million houses into the cheaper ones, find that right now, on South Whidbey in particular, more than about 22% of the houses on the market are $1 million homes and above. There are, last time I checked, there were about 19 Now, there were 20 houses that were over $1 million. There were only 8 that were under 300,000. So if you're selling $1 million houses, great. But if you're trying to find a $300,000 house or below, it's tough. That also means here's the median days on the market. So how long does it take a typical house to sell? And that's gone from being months to being weeks. And in some neighborhoods, that's down to even less than that. To put this in perspective, Seattle is on the order of 7 days. So that's why you're seeing places where they put up a house for sale on Friday, they get multiple offers over the weekend, and it's already sold. We've already pointed out to Deborah Jones, who I co-list with frequently, or she co-lists with me, whichever way you want to look at it. But there's a few houses we've had which just, never got a chance to put the sign up because the guy told the neighbor and the neighbor went, great, I'll buy the house. These things are starting to happen here. But it doesn't mean that every house is selling that quickly. This is the median. So just as many houses took less time than that as took more time than that. But it's happening much more quickly than it did before. And that says that just reinforces the fact that there's demand. If you want to look at it another way, how long would it take to sell all the houses on the market right now? That's the months of supply. And back in the midst of the recession, we had years of supply. And now we have about a half a year's supply. So that means that as fast as houses are coming on, they're being taken off. It would take 5 months to really go through all the inventory on North Whidbey and about 7 on South Whidbey. So again, things are moving quick. I like to look at median price per square foot because this shows how big was the house? Well, if it was $1 million house, but it was a 10,000 square foot house, that's one thing. If it's a 300 square foot house and it sells for the same price, then that's something else. So this kind of normalizes the sizes of the houses and things like that by just going, what's the dollar per square foot? If you wanted to buy this square foot, how much would it cost? And to me, this is an astonishing thing because I'm a frugal minimalist. To take a square foot of a house and realize that you'd have to lay down $260 on that square foot to buy that square foot. I usually don't have $260 in my wallet. To me, that's just a phenomenal thing. But this also emphasizes that the prices are going up. They're going up across the board. And that if you feel like South Whidbey is an expensive place to live, you're right. It is $250 a square foot in South Whidbey as compared to $190 in Oak Harbor. So that says if you're just going to try and buy a 1,000 square foot house, it's going to be cheaper to be in Oak Harbor than it is going to be, in Clinton. Having said Langley, when I was giving the Langley presentation, I got a question, so I dove back into it again. This is that same chart, but this is only showing South Whidbey. So this black line is South Whidbey. This green line is 98260, which is Langley, but as far as the zip code goes. But if you just look at downtown Langley, so you're in Langley Water, Langley Sewer, Langley Culture, about 2 years ago, it just kicked in. And instead of being 250, it's now up over 350, heading to 400. This is why I know a number of folks one of my clients who really want to live in downtown Langley because they really got to loving it. They moved here, they're in Clinton, they're in Greenbank, they're in Freeland. They want to get downtown Langley. They're even in Langley and they want to go downtown Langley. And if they didn't get in 2 years ago, they're feeling hurt. They're feeling like they missed out for good reason. Unless, of course, you happen to have a house in downtown Langley and you're trying to downsize, in which case, you've got some opportunities. So there are places that do stand out, and there are significant events that come out from the data as well. So here's Freeland, because Freeland's got its own things going on as well. This is not the square foot per dollar per square foot. This is the median sales price. And what I did was over the last 5 years, I'd like to say I broke it up, but because I'm a realtor, there are certain state regulations that I have to follow with what I can talk about, how I can talk about it, and what I can present. So the software is actually generating these charts. I tell it what to generate, but if it's, so it actually broke out waterfront versus not waterfront. And the median sales price in most of the Freeland area is down around under $400,000. But if you look at the waterfront properties have gone from being about 700 in here to being 900 in here. So waterfront's worth twice as much. I actually suspect this is under-reporting the value of waterfront, because it may not surprise you to find that some people trying to sell a house will list a stream as waterfront. And if you're really proud of salmon and you really like salmon, that's a salmon stream. That's a pretty cool thing. But that also, Goss Lake, you're not going to say it's not waterfront. Deer Lake, you're not going to say it's not waterfront. So I suspect if you did saltwater waterfront, there'd be a much more, a wider distinction. And if you got waterfront, congratulations. I'm a half a mile back from the waterfront, and I figured I saved $500,000 by walking to the $1 million view.
And what is you're talking Freeland here, but I know in Clinton, there's homes, when you say waterfront, does that mean a view if you're high up and you see the water, or are you talking about walking down the beach?
One of your borders is water.
Is water. Okay.
And there's some fine distinctions on that, in that I just found out there's a property I was looking at to help somebody with, of course. I wasn't looking at it. They were looking to do something with it. And they weren't allowed to call it waterfront because they owned, if you look at the line and the carpet, they owned to the line of driftwood. Mm. And the community owned beyond. So they weren't allowed to call their house waterfront.
Oh, really?
Now, I'm
but
sure
they were right down their ground level.
Oh, it was ground level. It was water level. It was close, but it was. So there's those fine distinctions, and there are going to be some realtors that are going to go, well, we can't say it's waterfront, so we won't. There's going to be other ones that say, there's a puddle in the backyard. It is, which is all the more reason to actually go look at the things. In some markets, not on Whidbey, and in some markets, and I hesitate to say this, but I'm going to pass it along because I see it as a trend coming that I want to verify. In some markets, 30 to 40% of the houses are being sold sight unseen because it's at a condo and they walked into one of them and they figure if it's on the fourth floor, it's going to be the same thing and they just buy it. But it's the real estate industry is changing quite a bit.
When you say sight unseen, that means not even internet?
No, they're doing internet.
Virtual reality
they're doing internet.
Stuff?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
But they're not there walking around the building.
Right.
Okay.
When I do break out median sales price, then, I said 400,000 is for South Whidbey. Overall, Whidbey is 340. That's the very first chart we went to. But South Whidbey is still the most expensive. It's also flattened lately. So South Whidbey is up here. North Whidbey is down here. But you see, it's hardly had any kind of an interruption at all in their sales prices, because the Navy is just so busy that they're just pulling in so many folks that they didn't even slow down in the winter, really. Coopville has more spikes than you see. It's got spike. The fewer houses there are in the area, the spikier the data. So some of these things will look really bouncy, and that has to do with the fact that we're not in Bayview. So let me go back to here and just say, okay, so commonly folks are recognizing that there's an affordability issue on South Whidbey, on Whidbey in general. This says that South Whidbey's got more of a problem than the other areas, at least just in terms of housing prices go. So I decided to look at the other islands. And there aren't that many islands that are readily accessible when you get down to it. So I compared Whidbey, which is all the way down here, to San Juan Island, which I thought was going to be a lot higher, and it was. It's almost like twice as high as Whidbey, or 100,000 more than Whidbey. But then you look at Vashon, and Vashon is ending up at 600,000, and you look at Bainbridge, and it's over 800,000. So as much as we feel that Whidbey may be unaffordable, or has got an issue with it, we're the cheap one. The other ones are just getting out there. And I'm really curious. The data does a regular update, a comprehensive update on the first of each month. So the Coopville folks are gonna, oops, go back here. The Coopville folks are gonna find out what happened to that next data point after that one. I'm real curious. So just give that same sort of thing. So how do we compare it to the mainland? And I just picked 3 places on the mainland. I picked Everett, Seattle, and Bayview. And of course, we're still the cheapest down here. For a while there, we were actually more expensive than Everett, but Everett's steadily climbing back up again. And there's Seattle that is, in the national news and whatnot. But if you go over to where I used to live in Bayview, it's even higher yet. Median house price over there is $900,000. I was talking to somebody the other day that bought a condo for $310,000, and it's now worth 1.3. So they could easily just sell that, clear $1 million. If they have the mortgage still, they may not have the mortgage yet. What this means is that for folks that are looking for affordable housing in the Puget Sound area, King County is not it. And then you start reaching further and further out, and that's where we are. Now, it's arguable as to whether or not it's going to happen here or not. One thing I can pass along, though, is after I started writing these books, I started getting known for being able to write about personal finance, and having almost lost my house, I was seen then as somebody who could write about foreclosures and short sales and what that emotionally is like to go through. So I got hired by a real estate news outlet that was online. And in the midst of that, I got to watch all this stuff happen because they hired me in to write about foreclosures and short sales. And within 2 years, we were talking about multiple offers in downtown Seattle. And what had happened in downtown Seattle was the same thing that's happening here. Remember I was showing those low inventories, how we're just dropping down? You can't go less than 0 on inventory. You got to have something, and at some point it bottoms out. What happened in Seattle was that inventory dropped and dropped and dropped until it couldn't drop any further, and it flattened, because you're always going to have somebody that has to sell because the relocation at the best, families have issues and things like that. As soon as it hit that and started bottoming out, that's when the prices kicked in, because the supply couldn't go any further and the price took off. I'm suspecting, and this is not a fact, this is not an analysis, but if we follow that same trend, we'll start seeing we could start seeing that kind of price acceleration. And I think that may be what's been happening in Langley for the last couple of years. I don't know if it's going to happen everywhere else, though, because you look at Everett, and Everett hasn't exactly kicked in the way Seattle did. So this is the same 4 places: Whidbey, Everett, Seattle, and Bayview. And when you come down to it, the reason that Seattle does make the national news is because here's the Seattle line for how many houses they have for sale. And of course Whidbey and Bayview are down here at the bottom. There's not much going on. But you look at what happened just here in this last few months. Seattle added more houses to sell in their market than all 3 of these other markets combined. So this is one of the moderating effects, because that says that there's a supply in King County that is going to draw off some of the folks that might be looking up here otherwise. Whether it's good news or bad news for you, it is what it is. And that's why I like to just talk about the data. Interpretation is more. How many other brokers? Are there any other brokers in the audience? No? Oh, okay. I invited some of them just because you can get a different point of view. Really, if you're interested in any of this stuff, I'm going to be happy to talk to you about it. But really, go talk to somebody you trust and ask them about what they think the situation is. So you notice these are the charts that are all from Washington State. This gets outside of Washington State, because as much as Seattle is in the news for not being affordable, if you look at Seattle as being part of the Pacific Rim community, Seattle's here. Now, this is not a dollar per square foot or anything like that. It's harder to compare against currencies and whatnot. So this is an index. I can give you the links to the analyses that somebody else did. But what it comes down to is you look around the rest of the Pacific Rim. So California, and I can read off some of these if you want. But here's Seattle. And there's only 3 places that are more affordable. That's Portland, Sacramento, San Bernardino. So places along the West Coast. But over there is Hong Kong, San Jose, LA, and I think, yeah, there's Vancouver. So, just up the road is one of the most expensive places, most unaffordable places on the Pacific Rim. So again, it gets back to, if somebody's got a choice of where they're going to build their buildings, build their corporation, if they're going to be putting in an industry or whatnot, and if you're thinking about where your folks are going to have to be able to live, because you've got to pay them enough so they can live there, then Seattle is still going to be affordable. So even though Seattle looks unaffordable, there's international pressure that suggests folks are going to buy here. There's also the foreign buyer situation where there's a lot of folks that are deciding that instead of buying stocks, bonds, commodities, they're buying real estate. They're buying real estate just as an asset. They're not doing it as income property. They're buying it to just have it sit there. And that has been one of the major drivers, anecdotally, in the Bayview prices. I say anecdotally because the database does not accurately represent who actually buys a house. It's very common, even on the island, that if you get a chance to look in the county records, you can click on, if you go on their website, you can click on the parcel and they'll tell you who owns it. And a lot of times it's going to tell you an LLC or a family trust or something like that, so you don't actually know who owns it.
When I see Pacific Rim pressure,
yeah,
I think of earthquakes. And I think of
Isn't this a kind of a bizarre thing?
Pacific Rim
and tsunamis and volcanoes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that a crazy place to be?
I'm wondering if anybody knows about that.
I think the news is out, yes. I'm so glad I'm not in downtown Hong Kong on the 30th floor of a tiny little apartment. I mean, I'm in Cultus Bay. I'm looking at a tsunami zone. I'm on a fault. And I look at some of the other places and yes.
A question about the slide before about Seattle putting on the market double the houses to sell. Is that sustainable?
No, I don't think so. I don't know exactly what sustainable would be in that case, but I do know that the majority of those housing units that were being permitted for 3 years ago when I was writing about that market were for 1 or 2 bedroom. They were not for families. They were specifically targeted at IT workers who wanted to be downtown, and there was no expectation that they would have kids.
And retired people.
Not as much retired people. No, they're after the money coming from Amazon and everything else. Those places are getting so different that they're not even installing full kitchens because they're living such an urban lifestyle that they expect to go out to dinner. There's not even a cooktop in some of them. What they do is they have units that are about the size of an iPad, little induction thing, and you store them in a drawer, and then every burner that you need, you just put up on the counter and you plug in. And the rest of the time, it gets out of the way. Not even putting in full ovens, they're putting in toaster ovens, convection ovens, and things like that. Granted, you could have a really large convection oven, but they're not doing the bakery stuff.
It seemed to me in Seattle that what was coming on the market the last month, a lot of them were condos.
Yeah.
They're all downtown.
Yes.
That's where people want to be.
Yeah.
A lot of them are condos. And there's very few single family homes that come on the market in Seattle. So what I'm wondering is, are they building more condos so they're going to keep coming on the market, or have we?
You can only go so far.
Yeah.
There's an EPA study out where they showed growth for the entire nation. Of course, they weren't just focusing on us as much as we'd like to think they were. But they showed population densities for the next 20 to 30 years. The population density on the east side is somewhat moderate, but it's definitely denser than it had been. But they're expecting Seattle type densities all the way up to almost to the mountains. And they are projecting that's going to happen up and down the I-5 corridor. But you look at the islands and it doesn't happen because we have resource limits. We've got commute limits, water limits, septic limits, power limits, and a few other limits, of course. So it is, it's one of actually the reasons hi, I'm a geek. When I moved here 15 years ago, that's the analysis I did. And I said, I want to be in a place that's not going to grow very fast. And because I had been living in downtown Seattle, Bellevue, Kent, Renton, Everett, Mill Creek, and I'm so glad I'm not there anymore. Anyway, I digress. But yeah, I don't think it's sustainable because they can only pack so much density, especially into an earthquake zone, and especially into a place that's got that geography. So let's switch now to Island County. And this data is our local source. It's URLs down here. I've got the URLs for most of this stuff available. Like I said, this is one reason I'll put all the slides up online so you can grab this stuff. Good luck if you wanted to try typing that all in by hand. Is Whidbey changing? Yes, this is the generational transition. This is how quickly or not quickly the island is aging. So Washington State in general, median age has gone up in the last, it's from 2000 to 2011 sort of place. It's gone up a few years. Island County has been older and is growing older. I'd say that's about 5 years. Oak Harbor, it got older, but not by much, only a couple of years in that amount of time. Coupeville, Freeland, and Langley each got much older, and actually the biggest gap is in Freeland. Between 2000 and 2011, gone from about 42 or 43 to about 55. That's almost a year per year. What that suggests is the folks that are here are staying here, and the folks that are leaving are being replaced by about the same age. So you start talking about sustainability, and until we have more immortality, there's something that's going to, and I got stock in a company that swears they can do it. Seriously, I really do. It's a bizarre company. I love it if they ever work, but that is something that is definitely affecting affordability on the island. If it is, the more and more people with gray hair, the more housing is devoted to us, and where do the young folks go? Well, at this point, Oak Harbor is one of their best bets. But it isn't just about how old we are; it's about whether or not you can actually afford to live here if you've got a job. This again is Washington State, and what they're saying is that 3.7 times income, housing costs 3.7 times income, generally speaking. Island County is a little bit more expensive than that and getting more expensive as we go. Oak Harbor, again, is the most moderate. And then down here, the gap is getting much wider, much faster for Coupeville, Freeland, and Langley. That is representative probably of the fact that, well, as a matter of fact, it says housing prices are growing faster than incomes. Which, if you've been celebrating the fact that your house went up 10% last year, cool. I mean, I know I am, but I also know that most of my friends that actually have full-time jobs are not getting 10% raises. Unless they're getting an 11% raise, they're falling behind. And that's a difficult problem. This is the other one that's kind of screwball, and it was surprising the first time I saw it. This is the vacancy rate of housing. Now, it's hard to really have, this is not like rental vacancies. This is how many houses are empty. In Washington, it's about 9% of the houses are empty. And that's kind of, that kind of makes sense. You know, you're not always going to have somebody in a house. You know, somebody's working somewhere else for a while, or family transitions happening. And there are going to be vacation houses everywhere, second houses and whatnot. North is about the same. Coupeville, much higher. And then South Whidbey is 27%. More than a quarter of the houses on South Whidbey are considered vacant by the U.S. Census. So, you know that each neighborhood's different. My neighborhood is Sandy Hook. We've got a marina. swimming pool. I am not trying to sell you on. I'm just trying to talk about. We've got waterfront, all this sort of thing. I live there full time, and I know that if I walk down there in August, the marina is going to be full, the swimming pool is going to be full, and almost all the houses are going to be full. I walk down there in January, and I know most of the houses are empty. I don't think we have even a 50% occupancy rate in Sandy Hook in October, in December, in January. And one thing that puts an exclamation point on it for me is when the power goes out. And can you imagine the power goes out around here? A lot of those houses are like second, third, fourth, fifth homes. And those are the folks that can afford to have the automatic power. So I know that the power went out because the diesels kick in. It isn't always diesels, but I can hear the generators kick in. And then there's this interesting thing where there's going to be a bunch of empty houses that have power. There's going to be a bunch of occupants that don't. And there's going to be a few that actually are using their generator. But it's an interesting thing to walk around the neighborhood and realize that scenario. And I am sure I've got 4 blogs. I'll be commenting on one of them already. But what this says is it's not that South Whidbey doesn't have enough houses. What it says is there's a lot of them that are empty. And then you get into the issue of how do you fill them? Do you fill them? This is part of America. You're allowed to have 5, 6, 7, 8 houses. Which candidate was it that couldn't count how many houses they had? I have one, by the way. It's really easy to count mine. Matter of fact, you can stand in mine. In one place, you can see the front, the back, the side, the whole thing. And yet, this is an issue that we're dealing with. And within this, then, are all the issues of Airbnbs and vacation rentals and whatnot. Because we're not the only ones that have this sort of an issue. Matter of fact, our issue of vacancy rate pales compared to other major parts around the world. These are just some studies I found. Vancouver has decided that if it's vacant a certain number, and each of these has got a different criteria for what they consider vacant. So if you want the data, go into here. Vancouver is saying we're going to tax you an extra 1%. Same thing for Victoria, Australia. Hong Kong is just saying here's a 15% fee on the value of the house, the value of the condo, the value of the apartment, whatever it is. New York City is trying to figure 0.5% to 4% depending on the value. Washington D.C. is 3%. London is thinking about 100%. Increasing your property tax instead of a one-time fee, a yearly doubling of your property tax. London in particular is known for certain streets in downtown London just being empty. All the houses have been bought as asset investments. Nobody's living in them. And they're doing that because they're missing out on income, but they're also avoiding risk. So I know somebody on the island that had 6 houses, and they just bought them as, well, it's fun to buy houses because if you got the money, buy the house. And if it's going up 10% a year and that's better than the stock market, well, great. If you put a renter in it, it might catch fire. It might have a roof leak. There's all that much extra work. So this is not just a Whidbey thing. This is a global thing that folks are saying, we'll just buy the house and we just look to sell it some other time. The one I also would be curious about is the Paris one, which is that they get charged. The one article, I haven't verified it, the one article that was suggesting 60% increase on whatever the rent would have been. You have to give the 60% of that to Paris. And right now that probably has much more energy behind it. To put it in perspective, this is a local number again. This is the homelessness on Whidbey. Now, these numbers are atrociously inaccurate, and that is acknowledged by the folks that put together the report and anybody that deals with the homeless. Homeless are really good at not being found because they don't want to be found. There's no advantage to being found. But in general, we've got at least a couple hundred homeless, and if that was 5 times larger, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. But I do know that I know a number of the baristas and other folks in that sort of level of service industry, they have great outfits because there's great stuff donated to Good Cheer, but they're hanging those clothes on tree branches, and they're not going to acknowledge that at work. One of the things that's been handy about almost losing my house is that they would acknowledge it to me because I was scared in a similar situation. But if you take that that vacancy number that we were talking about, which is 27%, and let's see if I can actually find this number. I finally found it, and let's see if I printed it and brought it. But if we have a 27% vacancy rate, and it's in, of course, the other notebook, if you argue that we have about 47,000 houses on the island, and if you just use that overall number of like about, what was it again? So for the entire island, well, all of Island County, Kittley, Camano, of 18%, there's more empty houses than homeless by an order of magnitude. And I'm curious on, so that says that there's not an infrastructure problem. There's an availability problem, and I wonder what kind of incentives would actually kind of bridge that gap. If you gave somebody $1 a year to have a homeless person stay in your house, no one's going to take it. If you gave them 100,000, they'd probably say yes. So what number in the middle would actually help alleviate that? And I don't know, but this is one of the measures of the unaffordability on the island. The other thing that we're finding, though, is parts of Whidbey are starting to act like Aspen. In that Aspen, matter of fact, bicycled through Aspen 20 years ago, part of the Just Keep Pedaling. Huh?
Colorado.
Yeah. And as I bicycled through, you get to see things at 10 miles an hour, which gives you more time to watch things. And it was apparent that in Aspen at that time, they were having to bus their baristas, wait service people 35 miles. But there was a town 35 miles down the canyon, and they set up a bus service, and that's what they did. And that was 20 years ago. Aspen is not more affordable now, so they're having to bus them 50 miles and further. One of the issues Whidbey has is Whidbey doesn't have that option. If you're going to take a 35-mile bus ride to work in downtown Freeland, well, why wouldn't you look for a job in the neighborhood you're in? And some of the local businesses are already seeing problems because they can't hold on to their employees because the employees are going to have to move somewhere else. Not because those places are more affordable, but because the jobs are more available. And until there's enough jobs and well-paying jobs, that's an issue that, well, in real estate, it's actually one of the reasons I became a broker, actually. I looked at, when you look at, what it is you understand, what is it you can work on and get compensated for, I realized that I had some of the stuff to go with this. And a lot of folks don't have that option. I'm comfortable with data. I'm really comfortable talking to people, if you can't tell. And there's a lot of folks that don't have those options. A lot of the contractors that moved out during the Great Recession, they moved to places where they got new businesses. We've got need for contractors here, but if they've already got a business in Monroe, why would they come back here? They've got a business. They're already resettled. Some of the things that have restrained growth on the island have been the things most of us are familiar with, especially if you're not on public water or public sewer, which is water, sanitation, and commuting. The water issue, the sanitation issue, and commuting all are finding answers in other places. And some of them are finding answers here. If you buy a piece of raw land around here, you got to get water to it, you got to get a septic, you got to be able to take a septic, it may not be able to. And if it's inaccessible, well, if you can work remotely, great. But a lot of folks can't. But if you go up to the San Juans, if you need a septic, there are places up there where they'll take out dynamite and they'll blast into a rock and they'll build themselves a septic system. In the Middle East, what they've taken to doing is instead of trying to find a big green lawn that has the right soils, which they may not have, they're digging vertical shafts where they dump in the soils they need. And you end up with a very much smaller septic system. On the island, composting toilets, I'm a fan. I don't have one. I can't have one. But I know that they're in use. And incinerating toilets, which are awesome, and make sure you put down the lid. Really, I mean, the jet of flame, it's astonishing. And then water is, if we catch rainwater, if we reuse what we've got, there's actually an awful lot available. Whether or not the county wants to do these things right now is almost immaterial, in that if there's all this demand around the region, around the world, for places as nice as this that are as affordable as this, then if you're coming in, then you've got that much incentive to go convince the county to do something different. And if there's enough folks doing that, then maybe things change. I will applaud Whidbey Tells Big Gig. Those of you who haven't been following it, it's basically incredibly fast, high-speed internet, to the point that, and it really isn't as much as how fast things come down, it's how fast things go up. So if I was uploading this video, if I was recording it and then uploading it, and I'm able to just live stream it now, which is sweet. Before the big gig, it would take me a task that would take me an hour would be onerous, because you'd have to do it without having interruptions. With the big gig, if it took me an hour on the old one, it takes me 6 minutes on big gig. And that's on the low end. The high end big gig, it would take 6 seconds. Then I've exercised it, and it is astonishing. What was weird about it was, before I was a broker, I was a project manager for an online museum. So the way the computers changed the internet, which is a whole other topic I'd love to talk about. But we had to do promotional videos and things like that. And I would have to spend an hour or 2 or 3 uploading promotional materials. And then once the big gig went in, I went into some of the businesses like Wi-Fi Grill or Fine Balance Imaging downtown Langley, and it just goes straight up. The irony was I was getting paid by the hour. So I really didn't have an incentive, except for the fact that I would make my boss happier because she could spend less money on me. But that is not trivial if you're working in that industry. And this is one of the opportunities to actually draw in new jobs that pay well without really impacting an awful lot of the other things we have here. You don't need bigger roads, you don't need bigger ferries, you don't even need much more electricity, if any. It's really sweet. So that is one place where that limit is starting to be breached, and I suspect that the other ones will be breached as well. And then there's the trendy one, which I love, tiny houses. These things are so much fun. I joke about my small house with 868. I only live in 600 of it. These things are like 124. There's a woman in Olympia that raised herself and 2 kids in 96 square feet. And as ridiculous as that sounds, when you think about folks that raised family on board ship, on a board boat, like a sailboat or something like that, it's actually very similar. Inside, the design philosophy is very much the same. Instead of going through and just having a 2,000 square foot house and you kind of find the right carpet that fits all of it, and you find the countertops that work well, and the walls that work well, and the windows that work well. If you've only got a place that's this big, you can spend an awful lot on that one window and on that door. And so these things are actually sweet. This one here at the far end, this one, by the way, was built by a woman that was on the island, moved down to Portland to go work in that industry, and she just moved back in the last year. So I hope she's going to be building houses. This one in particular was a prototype that I got to live in for a week. It now has become part of a tiny house hotel in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 6'2", and I was in this thing. It's 128 square feet. I would have changed the size of the toilet. But everything else was fine. If my back was out, I would have had trouble getting in and out of the loft. But there's other designs that don't require that. And Langley has been very busy right now changing their code so that they allow more tiny houses. The thing that's handy about these is this is not like somebody having to just, oh my God, I have to live in a tiny house. These things are really sweet. If you can live that small, and you've got to be willing to live that small, you cannot have 48 pairs of shoes. Okay. But if you're a minimalist like me, now I would still need another one for my books. But this is a viable solution. One of the reasons it's not implemented is because it doesn't go in accordance with an awful lot of the code. But this is the sort of thing that can start to make the place more affordable, give us more options. And it's even to the point that one of the things I love about this is some high schools are letting students build these as senior projects. So when you graduate, you have a house. And then you just, you still have to find a place to put it. But when you're 18, that's probably your family's backyard or something like that. But imagine if when you graduated high school, and some of you may have already had, but when you graduated high school, you already had your own house. How much faster along would your career or whatever have been if you had that advantage?
What do you do with the sewage? Where do you empty the toilets?
It depends on how you design it.
It's not
some
like
of them
a
are actually
campground where you go to a dumping site.
No, some of them actually just tie right into the home septic system. Some of them, what some houses are doing is they put in an RV pad, and sometimes there's an RV there. But this is effectively like an RV.
What is an RV pad? It has a sewage.
Yeah. It has something for power, something for water, and something for sewer. Yeah, my parents had one, and one of the these can be used for an awful lot of things. They didn't have a tiny house. They had a really nice house in California on the ranch land, but what they had was an RV pad, and then whenever they needed more guest space, they'd pull in an RV, hook everything up, and if you snored, they wouldn't hear it. I like the nautical version of this, though I don't expect to see a bunch of liveaboards in Holmes Harbor, but that's actually a more traditional way of doing this is liveaboard boats. One of the other things that's happening is just simple psychology. People don't want to sell until they can find something to buy. I can't blame them. If you sell it and you don't have something to go live in, you're not homeless. And there's little to buy because if you're willing to sell. And I think within the last few weeks, that may be breaking through. An awful lot of folks are kind of saying, okay, so I'm going to sell them. And things have become much more active recently. And we'll see what happens. That's why this presentation gets updated on a regular basis, is because you've seen the seasonal variations, there's year-to-year variations. And for instance, some of the things that will affect any of this are going to be politics, as much as we don't want it to be politics, the economy, stock market, job market, all those sorts of things. So of course Whidbey is changing. It's the only constant. The island actually isn't changing unless you speak geologically. And the people are changing, the economy will. There's enough folks saying that we're going to have a recession that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy as far as I'm concerned. We're going to have a recession because everyone thinks we ought to have one. And just whether or not it's a big one or a little one. And how Whidbey changes is up to us. It's going to change. It's not going to keep the same culture because it's not like when one of us leaves the island that we train somebody to be just like us when they come onto the island. There's going to be different attitudes. I know at one point some folks moved into Sandy Hook and they wanted to turn it into a gated community. They wanted to keep the riffraff out. We were just saying we're already here. And we're also not as isolated as we used to be. My house was built in '64. I'm pretty sure there weren't very many permits involved. I'm sure it was harder to get to that part of the island. I don't want to go into my crawl space anymore. I really don't. But we're now known. When I hired into Boeing in 1980, one of the reasons I got the job was because if you remember back then, Seattle had a bad name. It had a bad rep. It was rainy. It was dull. The people were slow. They weren't stupid. They were just slow getting onto the interstate. And I was in Virginia Tech. That's where I graduated from. And we're flipping through the brochure. And the HR person says, so what do you like? And I pointed to this really awesome job that I actually ended up working as, the low-speed handling quality and performance of trans-atmospheric vehicles. Anyway, and she couldn't understand that. And I pointed at a sailboat and I said, I'd like to sail. Great, because they wanted to find folks that actually could enjoy living here. Trying to get folks to move to Seattle now is not an issue. It's growing by thousands of people per week. We have added a Seattle to King County within the last 5 to 10 years. So imagine Seattle, Bellevue, and then we just plunked another Seattle right beside it. That's how many folks have moved in. We now have 4.2 million people in the metropolitan area. And it's going to run into limits, but that EPA study says it's going to take decades before it really does. And in the midst of all that growth, sooner or later, folks are going to notice the big gap on the map where there's still room, where things are slower on purpose, where there's an interesting lifestyle too. And like I showed before, we're one of the cheaper places to be. So it's going to be an interesting time to see how Whidbey changes. So with that, I'm not going to shut up, but here are various ways to contact me. I have business cards in the back and whatnot. I work with Coldwell Banker Tara Properties over in Bayview. So, you can get a hold of me there. And also, I'm on Twitter. I'm kind of active on Twitter. I'm on Facebook because I have to be. And one blog that's just easy to keep in track is aboutwhidbey.com. Once a week, I write an article about what it's like to live on Whidbey, because there's a lot of folks off Whidbey that are curious about Whidbey. So for instance, the one I just wrote was getting lost on Whidbey. And it's about people that move here to purposely get lost from everything else that was out there, and what it's like to live in a place where you don't know what's at the end of that gravel road. Oh yeah, you're not going to get lost because you got GPS and whatnot. And even if you don't have GPS, if you're on pavement, you drive far enough, you're going to find water. You can only go so far. So you're only going to get so lost. But, it's that whole lifestyle that we've got here that is uncommon. And parts of that aren't going to change. Anyway, with that, I will shut up and let folks, if they want to get up and leave, because at some point someone's got to go to the bathroom. And otherwise, I'll stand around. And if you want to sit and talk, great. You want to stand and talk, that all works for me.
Thank you. Do you have a presentation that includes, I thought you were going to talk about trying to balance between preservation and building development?
I'll be happy to extend it into that. I mean, I was just kind of touch on that, but it gets into that thing I was just saying where the preservation is going to be more difficult, because when somebody comes in with enough money to buy a house cash, it's hard to tell them to keep that historic house the way that historic house was without getting it officially registered. The businesses are changing because the owners are in that demographic that's aging. And I don't see any way to keep that in the family because a lot of the kids don't want to stay here. So the only way the preservation is going to happen is not the only way. The most likely way it's going to happen is that folks come up with the money and do something like they're doing with Doghouse, where they decide almost on a philanthropic level to preserve it.
I'm also interested in conservation and maintaining, open space and
so one of the other jobs I've got,
that brings people here.
One of the other unpaid jobs I've got, I'm site steward for one of the Whidbey Community Land Trust properties. And if that property hadn't become part of the land trust, it would have been either one enormous McMansion. The view is straight down Cultus Bay, includes the Olympics, and looks down the Sound. It was a 9-acre farm run by Al Hammond, and he gave it up. He bequeathed it to the land trust. And right now, my main job is to make sure the blackberries, farms are fertile, and if they're not being farmed, the blackberries are really happy. But the land trust is doing what it can, and there is pushback because there are folks that are saying that for each property that is protected, we've decreased the supply without changing the demand, which drives up the prices, which makes the place more unaffordable. At the very same time, if we pave the whole island, then all the characters changed all the way through it. And I wasn't hoping to actually say I found the way to balance, but to bring up the forces that are in play right now that are affecting that balance. And I don't think we're balanced. I don't think that we can continue with housing prices going the way they are if incomes aren't keeping up, and the culture is not going to stay the same.
Well, the influx of all the increase in naval military activity on this island, have you noticed any impact?
Yeah.
I mean, I know people.
The Oak Harbor realtors are really happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I go up to their meeting. We have my company's got 3 different offices: Bayview, Freeland, and Oak Harbor, which is Bayview and Freeland are like this, and Oak Harbor's over there. But the Oak Harbor is so busy right now, and there's such a difficult problem finding housing up there that a lot of those families are moving to Mount Vernon.
Yeah.
Ironically, they're moving to Mount Vernon. They're not coming down the island. And I'm still surprised at that.
Expensive. Probably the cost.
Too
Yeah.
expensive.
There's a bit of that. But, Coopville is still relatively cheap. And these are the folks that are most likely to accept the naval activity. And yet, we're not seeing it. What I'm actually seeing more, and I'm not sure exactly how this is working out, but a lot of folks on the south end, a lot of working folks on the south end that are living in Oak Harbor. Because as long as the number 1 runs up and down often enough and at good enough times, that's a cheap commute. And if your job is along the highway. There are parts of this that are really unsustainable. And it's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to give this talk, not to say that I have answers, but that's why I wanted to talk about the trends. Because what I'm watching are the trends that are happening in a place that I thoroughly enjoy. And I don't know how it's going to play out. Because I know that some of the things that enable Aspen don't work here. And I'm curious. I wouldn't say I'm scared, but I know something's going to change because it can't keep going the way it is. Anyway, anybody else have stuff?
What's happening with the doghouse?
It's getting better.
Is there a plan?
Oh, I know there's a plan.
Do we know what it is?
The only thing I know is by what anybody else can know, just by walking by and see that there's hammering and nailing, and every once in a while they'll pull off a side panel.
Yeah.
And you just look at the lumber that's in there and you go, oh dear, they have to fix that.
What are you talking about?
The doghouse in downtown Langley.
Oh,
And if you look right across the street, Mike's Place is going through a similar sort of thing.
Ah.
Mike's Place is in a better situation. It's got its own issues. But there are a lot of places on the island that have heritage that, for one, I don't think they're always all going to be appreciated. I'm from back in Pittsburgh. Outside of Pittsburgh, did you ever see The Deer Hunter, the movie?
Yep.
Okay, my neighborhood was like 2 miles from there, so we were a slightly nicer neighborhood. So we weren't high society by any means. We had well, put it this way, and Memorial Day happened. We had a cemetery that, they put up the flags, and they were 13 stars in a circle. And it was a stone-built chapel from back then. And they put out the call to preserve it, and hardly anybody noticed. And they just took it down.
Wow.
Because of that experience, I don't expect that things will be preserved, because I know how easily something very valuable can be lost. And one of the
actually have a cemetery with 13.
Yeah, a lot of
Flag.
Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
The French and Indian War happened right around my neighborhood.
Oh.
General Washington, when he was Colonel Washington, was through the area.
Oh.
Yeah, which is also why I found it entertaining. 2 years ago, I actually got a gig to write a history series on South Whidbey, and they didn't use my part, but I got to do lots of research. I have more trivia about the history of South Whidbey than I need. But it's easy to drive around now and see how much stuff is already paved over, how many historic places are just gone. And I don't have any illusions about any of it staying. One example is last year for a while, I had the cheapest house for sale in South Whidbey. It was $225,000. When I was preparing it, of course, we'd bring in contractors to do a little bit of work here and there and whatnot. And they all said, when this goes on the market, tell me, because we're making so much money, because there's so few contractors, we're making money. We can finally quit renting. Goes on the market, none of them make an offer. The only folks that made offers were from off island, and some of those were cash. Because even if somebody on island can afford a $250,000 mortgage, or mortgage for a $250,000 house, if you're selling that house and somebody's going to say, I think I can get a mortgage, and somebody else is saying, here's $275,000 cash, then you get into problems if you say, I'm going to take the one that has the more difficult financing that's not giving me as much money. Because now you get into fair housing issues. Are you doing that because that happened to be a woman? Are you doing that because you thought that person was Islamic or Catholic? So it is on the house side, it's very difficult for islanders to actually buy on the island. And I don't know the solution to that. Yeah. It was a very sad thing too, because I was thinking, this is kind of cool, because these are my friends, right? They're going to get to buy a house. This is cool. And I get to help sell it to them. Great. And poof, they're not the ones. Now, happy to sell it to the person who's coming here. They're a very nice person, all that sort of thing. But to realize that.
Just plain didn't even make offers.
Didn't even make an offer. Mm-hmm.
And what kept them from making offers?
Don't know. You'd have to interview them. Yeah. Because.
Surmise, right.
Yeah. But that's the reality of what it's like in. Well, I mean, how many folks complained about the Californians coming up and buying houses in Seattle 10 years ago? And now it's the Seattleites that are coming over here and buying stuff, or the folks from China that are coming over and buying stuff. And that's the nature of the way our economic system works. If you've got the money, you can get it. And there's actually protections to make sure you do. So, any other questions?
I've seen I think we have kind of the same kind of attraction as like in Aspen or other places.
Mm-hmm.
I know somebody who was in West Glacier, Montana, same thing.
Yeah.
Like, there's no income, there's no economic base. What you can derive in the way of income to be able to live here doesn't work.
Right.
And even people that are retired, there's an awful lot of people who are living so close to the margin.
Yeah. That bump in property taxes makes a big difference. Or the amount of money you can make from an Airbnb all of a sudden makes a big difference.
Right.
The one stat I didn't have up here, of all the full-time workers on South Whidbey, 70% work off island.
Wow.
Only
That
30% of the
is a
full-time
shocking
workers.
statistic.
Yeah, only 30% of the full-time workers on Whidbey work on Whidbey.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
And then how many people here who work full-time also work on the mainland? That's another.
So one of the things we did was, one of the ways to make it more affordable to work here is to set up a co-works. And that's something I was helping initiate and somebody else successfully did. Congratulations to them. A co-works is basically, you get a room like this, you put in a bunch of tables and chairs and desks, make sure it has good internet, power, coffee, get a place to get rid of it. And you basically share an office space. There's finally one that's up and running in Clinton. And if you haven't heard of it, that just shows how hard it is to find out about these things. I know dozens of folks that are going to the co-works that are in Pioneer Square and in the U District because it's even cheaper to use those ones.
Well, why couldn't you create your own environment in your home?
Well, one of the advantages of co-works is because so many folks have built full-time jobs. For instance, if I go back to, I'll go back and, I won't. Go all the way back to the very start. So I am a consultant, a writer, a speaker, a teacher, a photographer, an engineer, an entrepreneur, and a real estate broker.
Right.
Okay, and with that, I'm having a rough time getting by.
Wow.
And when I say rough, I'm not living the stereotype of a real estate broker. I'm having to work it. I don't just sit back and go, oh, good, we sold a house. But this is not atypical. It is uncommon now for a full-time job to be 40 hours a week. Most folks are putting together a number of jobs to get by. And there's two parts to this. So one of those is that this is why CoWorks is working, is because you get to sit in with a bunch of other folks. And for instance, I've been in a CoWorks where I was working on one thing. Somebody was sitting over there. They got a phone call for a gig that they couldn't do. They walked over, put the smartphone up to my head and said, talk to this person. And that's how I got the job. That's what a CoWorks is really good for. Networking. And that is now becoming much more visceral, that that's the way we do the work. And that is the gig economy. That is more typical for younger folks. You look like you have a question in your mouth. Like you were about to say something. Are you were? Go for
I have
it.
a question. It's been a couple of initiatives that have come up in the last few years with organizations that are trying to promote South Whidbey to tech workers in Seattle as a family-friendly place to move and expand, take advantage of the big gig, and telecommute from here.
Yeah.
I'm
And I know some folks that are doing it.
I just wonder if you see. I'm sorry, I missed half your presentation.
It's cool. It's live streamed. You can go replay it.
Okay, I will. Thank you. Do you see that as viable, or do you see lots of impediments to that?
No, I definitely see it viable. I think it's a matter of time where we go from being ignored to all of a sudden being the hot thing to be. I get to work from Whidbey, you don't. But that's totally subjective. That's just me guessing.
But then housing, I mean, you end up with, the both the cost and the availability.
But again, this is, of all the islands, this is the cheapest one. Compared to Seattle, this is cheap. And
That's true.
Yeah.
But availability, number of
So-
folks on the market.
so to me, part of the issue is not necessarily building more houses, but being able to take advantage of the houses that are there, whether that's by encouraging rentals or things like that. Encouraging things like the big gig, but also part of it is there's almost a virality to it, which is it's going to kind of go viral. At some point, folks are going to go, oh, he's doing it, I'll do it. She's doing it, I'll do it. And until that happens, we're kind of under the radar. Like I said, when I moved out to Seattle in '80, Seattle was this thing that was disparaged. And I could see the same kind of change happening here, where all of a sudden we're just found. Because businesses can be built just on electrons now, there's nothing to say it can't happen here. The tiny house thing, I think it would be a great one that they fit on the ferry. We could build them here, fit them on the ferry, take them across, and we have enough artisanal work by artisans, there we go, that we could really produce some really sweet things that make the national news. And we got some really sweet stuff going on here. But the good news is that not enough folks have found it, which means I can still afford to live here. I think that's just a matter of time before everybody else realizes it. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, sure.
Wow.
Well, you're optimistic about that.
Yes, I definitely am. Because an awful lot of those decisions, as much as they're subjective at this point, at another point, they end up being very objective. Somebody is going to look at the cost of living here, the cost of doing business here, and the ability to draw employees here.
I guess in my mind, I didn't see it happening until Everett gentrified. And I still can't figure out what's going on in Everett and why it's still Everett.
I was surprised Everett was as low as it was when I saw those numbers.
It seems like a no-brainer.
I used to live there.
Expand into, but yet it's not.
They got a hockey team. They got a good basketball team or a baseball team.
Go downtown Everett, it's the same as it's been forever.
And I think it's just a matter of time that it's going to switch.
Way
Are they high?
higher. They're high.
What's way higher?
High. The prices, I said the price of real estate is. Our son was looking, he can't afford to, he's been pushed, and he was looking at that rate. It was just atrocious.
Trying to get back to the.
Well, Everett is welfare or waterfront. So,
Yeah, but see, there's the median prices for Everett. And sure, they're higher than Whidbey, but they're still way cheaper than anywhere else. I mean, once you get out of King County, there was 1 year, Pierce County went up 24.5% in 1 year. Kitsap just went up like 15% in 1 year as soon as they put in the high-speed ferry. If we were to get a passenger-only ferry that went from Langley to Everett, and a passenger-only ferry that went from Clinton down to Seattle,
Yeah. I just had an observation and maybe would appreciate some input on it. When we moved out here from the Rust Belt in the 70s.
What part?
Pretty close, Detroit.
Oh yeah.
We remember hearing stories of the poor folks in Bayview. No, really.
Yeah.
Who were elderly and owned waterfront and had to leave their homes because the property taxes got so out of hand they literally had no choice.
Yeah.
That was my grandma.
Really?
Had waterfront property in the country.
What, I mean,
There's nothing to
I
say.
know it's,
There's nothing to say it won't happen here.
yeah, that was my question, that was
Yeah.
just 40-some years ago, but things are changing so much.
It's almost like I think one of the ways to make it affordable is to have a big enough place that you can rent out a room, and the room pays for and that you just buy into the fact that you have to do an Airbnb, which of course ticks off all the hotels and the B&Bs who are going to fight it for natural reasons. But you got to have another income source over and above what you got. Somebody suggested it for me, and I said, no, my house is that small. I'm not going to do that. But we have to find other solutions, and one of them is to build more industries here. And the other is, kind of what Langley is doing is you buy into it. And you just say, okay, we're going to be premier. We're going to be known around the world, and we're just going to walk into that model. Unfortunately, they haven't walked into the workforce side of that yet. I mean, they're trying, but it's for a while there was a co-works I was part of that was over top the Brayburn. If you're familiar with the Brayburn, it's on 2nd. So my view was right down onto 2nd Street, and it was fascinating to just watch the Ferraris pull up. And they were the Ferrari sedans. It was cars that I didn't want to park any. I have a white truck. It was the cars that I didn't want to park my truck anywhere near because I knew if I dinged one of their fenders, that's the value of my whole truck. But matter of fact, I don't go to downtown Langley now unless I really have to. So I this is why I actually wanted to do these talks. Is not, like I say, not because I have the solution, but because the conversation is that important, and I can at least say, here's what the data is showing about what's going on, instead of just arm waving it. Here's what the data is showing. And when I see the data, it's saying that demand for this place is not going to go away, I don't think. Supply has got limits on it. And if the demand is going up and supply isn't changing much, then the price goes up. And if the price goes up, then the income's got to go up. And I don't know what's going to make the income go up unless it's remote workers. Because, so it's a tough thing we're walking into. And it's better to have some knowledge about what's behind all of it than to just wait until somebody says they've got a magic wand solution, in my opinion. Anything else? And, feel free to come up to me afterwards or email me and follow me on Twitter. I actually pull this data apart on about a weekly basis, or whenever I come across something. I'm helping somebody try to figure out how to sell a waterfront house. That's one of the reasons why I came up with that one chart. And I just put that stuff up on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and whatnot. So feel free to just jump in and talk about those sorts of things.
Thank you.
Trust me, it's my pleasure. I like doing this stuff.
I can tell. It's really great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really well done.
Now let's see how many views I get on YouTube.
And we've got one book here called Walking, Thinking, Drinking Across Scotland.
One man's search for joy, or at least a Guinness.
Oh, these are all your books.
Oh yeah. So the first book I wrote by the way, I've also do these talks on self-publishing. Just Keep Pedaling. I bicycled from Roche Harbor to Key West,
Wow.
which turned out to be part of it was before 9/11, part of it was after.
Wow.
So this is a pre and post 9/11 kind of story.
Wow.
And then what I started doing, after I did that one, I thought, oh, I can write a book. Oh, I know how I ought to write a book. So then these ones are actually better written. But that's my bestseller. These are 12-month studies up in the Cascades. So this one's on the wet side, where it's 120 inches of rain a year. This one's at Stevens Pass, and this is a forest fire coming in. It's far enough east.
What are they?
So I just went up to, I pick a lake, and I would go there 12 months out of the year. I wouldn't live there. I would just, do a day hike and overnight. Because there's a lot of books we have about, this is what it's like on a Saturday in August. It's like, well, what's a Wednesday in April like? And so I talk about how the seasons really change. And then I took that same notion, and I've been doing the photo version of these. So these are all, and so I've got 6 of those now, and these are all on Whidbey. So these are all on the Cascades. These are all on Whidbey. So I've got Cultus Bay, Max Welton Beach, Double Bluff, Penn Cove, Admiralty Head, and Deception Pass.
Places you visited 12 times.
So I just go,
That's
go to Max Welton Beach at sunset, because it's a nice night. Go take some photos, and
It's a really, really fun thing to do. I did it only one time, but
Yeah.
Japanese garden.
oh yes,
I did that with
Yeah.
membership. I always was a member, but I made a point of going every month, and it was incredible.
yeah.
It was incredible.
Yeah, there's the thing that got me is I did it by accident once. I got bored, and instead of trying to come up with a new place to go every week, I'm just going to go. My life is hectic enough. I'm just going to keep going to the Tianaway. The Tianaway, and to realize it's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
Over the course of 12 months, I went, I should write a book about that.
Wow, no kidding.
And then I got to the island and went, photos go quicker. So,
Are
anyway.
all of those on a website? On your website? Do you have a website?
Oh, I have numerous websites.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember the one. I'll go back on the YouTube.
So how do I find your YouTube?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Send me an email. Grab one of my business cards, either the pretty yellow ones or the dull real estate ones, and I'll send you the links. Especially what I'll do tonight is once I get home, I'll pretty this up and make sure that it's actually up.
Oh, good.
And then I write about it, because what I put online is the presentation itself, the slides themselves, some of the narrative that I just kind of talk at while we're going by, and also the video. And that way, anybody that needs it can come find the bits and pieces that they.
You'll keep your narrative up, right? What you,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's this is not scripted, if you can't tell. This is what I just decided to talk about.
Right, but what you said today will be on that YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll be doing is I'll check to see what the audio quality was and whatnot. And I just realized it kept going. I thought I shut